Now, voters in Istanbul have been reacting to Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan's win in the country's first direct presidential election. Erdogan declared victory yesterday. And this morning, voters in Istanbul said they weren't surprised by the result. In a moment, we'll be speaking to Michael Sercan Daventry from Londra Gazete. But first, Yasmin Khatun brings us up to date with this report.
Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan has won the country's first direct presidential election. In his first speech as president-elect, after winning just over half the votes in the country's first popular election for head of state, he called for a period of social reconciliation.
Kardeşlerim, gönülden ifade ediyorum. Bugün yeni bir toplumsal uzlaşma sürecini hep birlikte başlatalım diyorum. Eski tartışmaları eski Türkiye'de bırakalım istiyorum. Gerilimleri, çatışma kültürünü, sanal sorunları eski Türkiye'de bırakalım istiyorum.
Speaking to thousands of supporters from the balcony of his AK Party headquarters, his victory speech was met by cheers of adulation.
Bu akşam çok gururluyuz. Şu anda konuşamıyorum yani. Gerçekten bir dünya lideri, öyle söyleyelim. Yani konuşmakta güçlük çekiyorum gerçekten. Vekil İmam Hatipler olarak her zaman Sayın Cumhurbaşkanımızın arkasındayız, destekçisiyiz. Allah hayırlı uğurlu etsin inşallah.
Vallahi çok mutluyum, coşkuluyum. Yani Türkiye'yi bu seviyeye getiren başbakanımız, Cumhurbaşkanımız oldu ve millet olarak arkasındayız.
Erdogan secured his place in history on Sunday. Prime Minister for more than a decade, he won 52% of the vote, 13 points more than his closest rival. Avoiding the need for a second round off, Turks flocked to the polls as Erdogan emerged as a front-runner very early on. Under Erdogan, Turkey has emerged as a regional economic force and diplomatic player. His economic reforms tripled the per capita income of millions of Turkey's poor, and as his victory was announced, Turkey's markets rallied. In his victory speech, Erdogan said that Turkey would push for Israel to be tried at an international criminal court if it kept up its assault on Gaza, and that wounded Palestinians would be brought to Turkey.
İnşallah bu akşam itibariyle Gazze'deki yaralı kardeşlerimizi Türkiye'ye aktarmaya başlıyoruz. Buradaki hastanelerimizde...
Erdogan has been a vocal critic of Israel's recent assault on Gaza, and during his prime ministerial reign, Erdogan was fiercely opposed to the military coup in Egypt and the Rabah killings that took place a year ago. He also became a leading figure in supporting Syria's opposition in its armed revolt against the government. He is to be sworn in as president on the 28th of August. AK Party Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu is seen as a leading candidate to replace him as premier and party leader. Many commentators have said this election is just the first steps that will be taken towards a presidential system in Turkey, one that would allow for a much greater level of influence from the president-elect. Party rules barred Erdogan from serving another term as prime minister, but with the means that have been provided in his new role, President Erdogan says he will take full advantage of his rights. Yasmin Khatun, The Report, Islam Channel.
Well, I'm joined in the studio by Michael Sercan Daventry, who's the editor of the Londra Gazete newspaper. Michael, so impressive victory at one level, but less perhaps than some people expected. So will Erdogan be able to have the more powerful presidency that he's aiming for?
Absolutely, and he says that he will as well, because he got, let's face it, 51.85% of the vote, which is more than half. It's all he needs to win, and he has won, so he will be putting on a very strong show. But you're right to say that it isn't quite as strong as everybody thought it would be. Polls were predicting a turnout a victory between 55 to 57% of the vote. So the fact that the opposition has clawed it back down is, in a small scale at least, a victory for them.
And what about perhaps some of the coming conflicts? Because and it says he intends to be a very, sort of powerful presidential figure. His friends say like the French presidency, his critics say like Putin in Russia. But he's not a good guy in a crisis, is he? He reacts very confrontationally to the Gezi Park demonstrations, to the corruption allegations.
Well, that's only if you are opposed to Erdogan. The thing with him is that in terms of his reaction to the Gezi Park incidents, he did very well as far as his supporters are concerned. He cracked down on people who he says were incited from abroad by, hostile channels like the BBC and CNN, and he demonstrated a tough resolve standing up for the good Turkish policeman in the view of his supporters. So in terms of whether or not he's good in a crisis, his supporters certainly think he will. But the broader point, I think, which is what your question was, is about what things will be like under President Erdogan. And there is an argument to say that it will actually be quite stable, because we now have him for 5 years. There will be no leadership question. So that is one view. The other view, of course, is that he'll be abusing or rather extending the powers of the presidency and trying to do things like convene cabinet, which he hasn't done, nor has any other president done before him. And today it was announced that the day before he'll be sworn in as president, on the 27th of August, his AK party will be holding an extraordinary congress in which they'll be electing a new leader. So the question is, the person who comes out of that, will he be a puppet, or will he be a man of his own resolve?
And what's your guess on that?
It's all up in the air. Your report hinted at Ahmet Davutoğlu, the foreign minister. He's seen as a very strong contender, but there's been a lot of interesting commentary about him and his ideology, his policies, as an academic before he became foreign minister. Lots of people say about Davutoğlu that he is a pan-Islamist who basically sees all the borders in the Middle East as artificial, and he wants to unite the peoples of the Middle East under some form of sphere of influence, not necessarily a new Ottoman Empire, but a form of sphere of influence with Turkey at the centre. But his critics say that he's basing this ideology entirely on the imperialist ideology that German and British people had back at the beginning of the 20th century.
So a mixed problem there. But let's have a look at who Erdogan's supporters are. Do we have some kind of profile of where the core support comes from?
President Erdogan supporters, the bulk of them were AK Party supporters, and they range in the 40 to 45% mark of all of Turkey's voters. They tend to be conservative, most of them religious, Central Anatolian, and a very, very large number. But
so not a massive youth vote for Erdogan?
No, I'd say there was a massive youth vote of a certain kind. It's not so much young people as one entity, it's more young people who are socially conservative who would support him. But it's more than that. In this election, lots of nationalists voted for him as well, because the party, their own party, nominated somebody that they didn't agree with. And
what about foreign policy? I mean, we heard a big play there about Gaza. I mean, you wouldn't hear anything like that out of any other kind of politician in the West. How important is that to his support base?
I think it goes down very well with his support base. They want somebody who speaks out to what is regarded as crimes against, for instance, Gaza, or the horrible situation that's going on in Syria and in parts of Iraq as well. And the fact that Erdogan portrays himself as a strong Muslim leader is something that goes down very well. Beyond that, I don't think his electorate have a particular demand for anything more subtle than that.
OK. Well, that's where we're going to leave that discussion. But all these issues, of course, have been hugely debated on Twitter, and we're just about to have a look at what some people have been saying on the social media. So let's have a look at this. Rafael Erhan says 91 Turks living in Israel participated in the Turkey presidential elections, and 32% of those voted for Erdogan, which raises some questions about how his foreign policy must be playing there. There's another tweet here from Ahmet Davutoğlu, who says that all our institutions are working hard in order to bring the biggest possible number of injured Gazans to Turkey, and of course we heard that in the report as well. Moving on to the situation of the Yazidi people, Kenneth Roth tweets, for desperate Yazidis fleeing ISIS on the Sinjar mountain, no water, nothing to eat, not even a shadow, and we heard a bit about that earlier in the programme. From at Borzu, A damning Human Rights Watch dispatch from Iraq accuses the Kurdish KDP Peshmerga of abandoning the Yazidi in the face of the ISIS onslaught. And that's exactly the group of people, the Peshmerga, the armed Kurds who President Obama has just decided to arm, of course. Chris Doyle says, "It's not the lack of a timetable that troubles me about Obama and ISIS, it's the lack of a strategy in Iraq and the Middle East." UNICEF have to say that over 3.2 thousand children are now homeless in Gaza after their homes were destroyed. And Azam Tamimi says, "In a conflict, enemies mediate directly or via an honest broker, except in the case of Gaza, where the broker is the worst enemy." So that's some of the views that we've got from the social media and some of the things that people have been saying on Twitter. But now it's time for another break. Do rejoin us right after that break, and we'll be asking whether it's the international condemnation of its actions in Gaza that have pressurised Israel into holding its fire, or whether diplomatic pressures are at work. Plus, we'll have coverage of the weekend's pro-Gaza rally in London. All that after the break. Do rejoin us then.